If you ever need to recruit somebody into being a fan of the NFL, just show them this game, and if they don't like it, they're no longer your friend, or maybe, I guess, be more rational and say that the NFL just isn't for them. But yeah, this was an absolute insane game. This is such a rare case where the game is built up as being like this earth shattering deal, and it actually not only just delivers, but it actually like overcomes that notion and transcends it. So I am a bit spazzed about this one. I must say, I do always have a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for the Seahawks. They were the main team that really got me into football because Richard Sherman's rant on Michael Crabtree was one of the first interviews I really listened to, and it was pretty entertaining, I must say. So ever since then, I was kind of a bandwagoner. I was hooked on the Legion of Boom, and it's so interesting to see the transformation of this team. Basically, no real resemblance, to be completely honest, to that one, but at the same time, there are lots of parallels where they are kind of ahead of the curve on establishing a wave of the defense with all these hybrid defenders. As for the game itself, this is such a high level of competition. If you can't see that, I don't know what to tell you. And, hilariously enough, Saubert, if that's how you say it, I'm going to be honest, I, you know, heard him make the catch, and I've seen him float around a little bit over the years when, like, I would be looking at stats for obscure things. I think he was in Madden and was, like, pretty interesting to me in that regard. That is basically the extent of it, though. I don't know much at all about this guy. I think that is the overwhelming prevailing thing, and you know, him slipping on through and making a good, delayed route where he gets a good block off and then he gets into the play involved with making a 2 point catch that is just about as big as, a 2 point conversion can ever be. That is pretty insane because this game was just absolutely so focused on the stars where I was absolutely hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok, what have you, as, my previous video was claiming about, that happening to other fans. But I was that in this game because at about the time where the Seahawks were like a 3% chance to win, I thought to myself, you know what? This is just, this is not it. The Seahawks continue to be sort of pathetic, to be completely honest, in the sense that they're just playing scared. It's, a lot of, yeah, we'll just try to keep the game close and then we'll try to get it from there, which is what you do if you're the worst team. And if you're Seattle, you can't be doing that. Very rarely, with as good of a team as they have, are you actually going to be the worst team, and especially at home, where home field advantage might not mean as much as we once thought, but it still is a nice thing to have, of course, and especially in the case of Seattle, where the fans are actually just absolutely electric. So, I was just like, this is annoying. They're playing petrified. I'm just gonna be writing all about so many runs. I had the stats. I had it where, the 30th in rushing expected points added and pass rate over expected. Third to last, that is, in the entire league against the Rams, who are fifth in run defense expected points added. I think, you know, there was, of course, that big gain where Walker broke off like a 55-yard run. So that inflates the numbers. It makes the rushing look a lot more efficient than it actually was. There were so many plays, though, where it just was not moving the chains whatsoever, and it got Darnold into really bad predicaments. Which, it's not to say that he is this quarterback that completely needs coddled. I don't think he is that level of quarterback. I do think he is, you know, above that, but maybe still not quite at the like Josh Allen level, even though he can play at that from time to time. But I think all of that still remains true. But in this case, it wasn't enough to define them. And it just makes me want to tear my hair out even a little more sometimes because, just continuing to stick with the run and say that, yeah, we're going to set you up into, you know, third downs pretty much is the passing down. The defense is going to know we're going to run it on first and second down every time. That's going to, work out in our favor, though, somehow. And, Darnold, he wasn't shining. It was, the defense of the Rams was getting the best of him with that great line. And, I know people are thinking, well, if you run it, you don't go against the pass rush as much. And that's obviously true. But part of why you're not is because you're going to be punting, not having extended drives. And also, if you're guaranteed to be like in a third and long where the defense can just absolutely sell out to stop the pass because you couldn't run the ball at all in the first two downs, that's probably a worse situation than, getting some passes in there in first and second down as well. Regardless, you have an absolutely just unhuman game by Puka. So another, superstar there. It's, mainly the Rams superstars, to be completely honest with you. Leonard Williams was really dominating. DeMarcus Lawrence was getting in there a lot. The Seahawks have a great D line of their own. It's not just a one-sided thing. The defense of the Seahawks was very frustrating in the sense that there were times where it looked like what we've seen, but it was also just somehow, not finding a way to figure out Nakua being pretty much the only option with Adams out. And I get it, Nakua is just absurd. There were some plays where, he just makes a catch where he's reaching through a defender's arm on fourth down and he just, reels it in still. You can't really play it any better than that because Job was just completely blanketing him. But at the end of the day, it still was a lot of just one-on-one with him. And I think there reaches a point where if you're Seattle, they have to say that it's just anybody but Puka because it just gets to the point of being egregious where you're sticking to your general principles, which work very well in most cases, but they were not working in this one. And, Stafford was getting the best of them. He's getting it out quick. He's getting, precise deep plays. So there's a lot of stars shining for the Rams, and that makes it even all the more absurd to think that the Seahawks really pulled this one out because, again, it just really was, I think, a team effort for the Seahawks, as, bland as that can be to say from time to time, rather, where, people might not really know what to say, so they just say it's a good team win. But in this case, I think this is absolutely a case where you say it is a good team win because, again, with Saubert or whatever, I feel bad for saying that. I just am not entirely sure on the name because I've heard it like twice in my life. With him getting that 2-point conversion, being the hero of the game, that speaks to, I think, the game as a whole. Obviously, JSN with some spectacular stuff in the rare cases where Seattle was giving him a chance, by passing. And, Kupp had that 6 sideline catch as well. So, in limited opportunities, which is continually the theme with the Seahawks, it's always limited opportunities in the passing game because they love running that ball so much and getting 1 to 2 yards every play. So, in those times, though, they really did show their star power, but it just was so much more prevalent for the Rams that, usually if you have a performance like that, you are going to get it, but just the Seahawks continued to grind it out, even if they weren't, giving themselves the best opportunity, to be completely honest, and, they get it at the end with the right call to go for 2 there. You could argue, maybe you go for a tie in some instances there, but with the division situation being what it is, you absolutely need to go for the win there. So that sucks so much, I must say, for the Rams to lose in that way. It was going to suck a whole bunch for either team at a certain point because the Seahawks deserved to lose for most of the game, I think. And, at that point you just say, yeah, we weren't good enough. The team, outplayed us in most facets. So, you just take that one. But when the Seahawks made that comeback and, they really did show their fighting spirit, it does kind of get to the point where it's like, well, do either of these teams really deserve to lose? Like, a tie would have been honestly pretty fitting in that regard because most of the game was the Rams, but they didn't finish it out, so, which one matters more? It is still just going to be so touch and go with these Seahawks until they realize that, maybe it's short passing instead of running. It doesn't always need to be the depth of target they currently have, with Shaheed, always being a deep threat, and JSN being just absurdly good deep downfield as well, as just inexplicable as that is, with him not even, having really an experience to be on the outside like he has been. He's just freaking the GOAT somehow still. But with all of that said, it is just, you never know what you're getting with these Seahawks, and that does become part of the fun, but dang it, it also becomes just so frustrating time and time again, where, that 2-point conversion play where Charbonnet, props to him, great stuff, to make the sort of hustle play, as weird as that is to say, because he just kind of like walked over and grabbed the ball after it was fumbled. That doesn't happen. They don't win this game, I don't think. And, there's just lots of things like that. The illegal man downfield, that wasn't really an illegal man downfield as well. That sucks for the Rams. That is just kind of one of those things that, that will happen from time to time, that play is kind of wonky and the refs get it wrong. So it's not, something that is super distinct, but the Seahawks pretty much needed all of it. So, I wish this is going to be a wake-up call for the Seahawks, but I think they're probably just still going to do what they do and continue to be frustrating. But at least they're getting a really good chance to, still win with that model, because now with them having the inside track on the 1 seed, you need a lot less things to go your way to get to the Super Bowl or win it, with the weak competition coming out of the AFC more than likely. So, the treacherous road really does seem to be just getting out of the NFC. Seems like that's pretty much where all the good teams are these days. So, the Seahawks do have that, but I really, at the end of the day, if you couldn't tell, wish they would give themselves some more wiggle room by letting their talent flourish and extending games instead of shortening them to, just be as quick as possible by running every play, and then, hoping the defense bails them out, and, then eventually Darnold, JSN, Kupp, etc. can make some stuff happen in the limited reps they get. I want them to keep extending games and show that they are the better team. It's kind of the Green Bay Packers situation of sorts, where this was talked about by the Bootleg Football podcast. I know I threw some shots at Brett Coleman for his Chiefs take, but this was a great take on their part, where, pre-Parsons injury, the Packers were pretty much as good as it gets. And them trying to play games short, though, is kind of nonsensical because of that, because you just give the other team a chance to win by variance. Whereas if you extend this, you pass it, you air it out, like the Seahawks can, you keep giving yourselves more chances instead of saying, well, there's only like 3 possessions each way, so if we don't score on one of these because, maybe our offensive line does just get stonewalled twice in a row, and, there's no room for Walker or Charbonnet, and then JSN doesn't do something magical on 3rd and 10, what have you, we don't score there. We have to punt, and, if the defense doesn't consequentially get us like a pick 6 or something, it's a really rough situation to be in. So I hate that I have a negative tone on it, because at the end of the day, this truly was just amazing, amazing football. But it also just does really continue to remind me that, the Seahawks can be a very frustrating watch. This is a continual thing with them, where, any day they can beat the absolute best out there, any day they can beat themselves and, lose to whoever. So, again, a great game. This is exactly what the NFL needed. The golden goose of the Chiefs not being in the playoffs this year kind of makes things a little rough, and then you do have, the AFC just kind of sucking. But, the NFC is carrying their weight, and then some, with some great stuff like this. So it'll be interesting to see how things play down the line. I am going to try to make some much more consistent videos. I do have, I think, a good track on that, so I will be hopefully making more content more regularly. Either way, thank you very much for watching the video. I greatly appreciate it. And also be sure to treat yourself like a friend, as you really should.